Cool. Okay. All right. So we're going to kick this off. This is the uplink. So we're calling this Stop Leaks and Water Waste here. So we do uplink webinars. I think we've been pushing once every week and a half, every 2 weeks. This is, I think, the fourth or fifth one that we've done in the last 6 weeks or so. And we've really been starting to focus very, very heavily on network use cases. And so you're going to see the sort of Helium team and our partners shift and cover more about network use cases and sort of data usage on the network versus a lot of coverage, which of course will still be a mission of ours, but will sort of be less of an emphasis moving forward. So we've got an awesome discussion today. I'm going to let the NOWI team introduce themselves in a second, but we've got Jim and Charles. Do you like Charlie or Charles? I always forget. Doesn't matter. Charlie. Okay. Jim and Charlie Fayal, who are the co-founders of NOWI Sensors. So Charles has actually dropped the link to their website in the chat, so people can refer to that. And I am Mark Phillips. I'm the head of business development at Helium. I've been with the company for about 7 years now, and could not be more excited about the sort of progress that has happened over the last 18 months. So general sort of table of contents for today's webinar and discussion. I'm going to do a very, very brief Helium introduction, probably about 5 to 6 minutes tops. I've got about 6 slides. And then we'll kick it over to the NOWI team to sort of talk exactly about their applications, so what they've built, sort of the value that they're providing to their customers, which in their case is typically residential landlords. I think at least one of their customers is on the call today with us. And then we're going to have a fair amount of Q&A at the end. We're happy to sort of take Q&A, or I guess questions in the middle of a talk. So if people want to just drop questions inside the chat, that's probably the easiest way to do it. You know, we're more sort of the opinion that a back and forth discussion here is much better than just sort of droning on looking at slides, because everybody has enough of that these days. So before I jump into the Helium stuff, I do want the NOWI team to sort of introduce themselves briefly. So I will kick it over to Jim to sort of start that off, please, Jim.
Okay, would you like, want me to start off with our history of this, Mark, or?
Yeah, why don't you do a very, very brief history, but focus mainly on your own bios, and we'll do the history when you guys do your slides.
Okay. So we started this really last January as a result of my other son James's involvement as a patron in Helium, and that caused us to buy a couple of hotspots again in late January, and our interest in that led to the question of how do we deploy more hotspots. That quickly led to the thought of our friend Tim Desmond, who is joining us today, and his many properties in New London, Connecticut, as potential locations for hotspots. When I described the technology and the network to Tim, he said, I have an application. I'd like to measure water usage of my properties. I do have to say that the subjects of crypto, funny money, and Ponzi schemes came up, but Tim quickly got by that one, and we went on to discuss what his use case would be. And again, it was that he wanted to know, you know, if water was being leaked or misused at his properties. So Charlie and I ran with the idea, and then about a week later, we got a hold of Tim and asked him about piping sizes and a variety of other things in his properties. And that led to installing some 13 hotspots in New London, and so far 16 water metering systems at Tim's property. And we started all that in last May. And Tim's installations have, and the results have taught us a ton. We've learned how best to build dashboards that are useful to property owners, and that learning continues. We've learned that what the graph signatures of the various types of leaks and excess water usage tell us about what's causing them. Charles has taken this data and created algorithms that trigger leakage and excessive use dashboard and mobile alerts. We've learned that the hotspot coverage that's required for basement installations of water meters and Helium communication nodes. We've learned how to take measurements that indicate we have adequate coverage for plumbing, before plumbing and water meters. We've also learned much about hotspot installations, especially about antennas, various forms of hotspot backhaul, and the potential for moving to cloud mining hotspots. With Tim's installations running, Charles, with a terrific help from Travis and Lewis and Mark at Helium, has continually improved our firmware to make the system more resilient and reliable. And Tim and his installations have given us an extremely valuable platform for attracting other property owners to the NOWI system. And Tim has become our best spokesperson for the value of the NOWI systems. And now here we are, and we're trying to expand the system, not only in London, but in the future to other cities geographically close by.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we'll get into all that as we work through the NOWI specific stuff. Extremely helpful for the background. And then Charlie, just a few seconds on how you came to the project.
Yeah, so again, same background. I mean, my brother James really brought us into Helium, and Jim's background is he's a mechanical engineer turned businessman, went to the dark side. I'm a software engineer, electrical engineer turned software engineer. So yeah, Tim told us about the project. We have what we think is a really good set of skills to, bring it to fruition. And yeah, it's pretty much brought us to where we are today.
Nice. Okay. Well, appreciate that background. And of course, we'll get into the full details on your use case and how your hardware and sort of ultimately your application works. Before we get there, I'm going to do a little bit of bragging about the Helium Network and sort of fill in some gaps for people who might be entirely new to the technology. So the Helium Network at this point is the largest LoRaWAN network in the United States. So we started the sort of rollout of this technically in August of 2019, and we are now a mere 13, 14 months from that, and we have deployed at this point almost 10,000 of what is our primary LoRaWAN gateway, the Helium hotspot. And as you'll sort of see, moving into the future, we're working on deploying any LoRaWAN compatible gateway to the network. We have to date deployed coverage in over 1,800 cities. So most of these are in the United States, but I'm not sure if anybody's been watching the network growth over the last just 3 or 4 months. So we started shipping hotspots to Europe. I think it was probably 8 weeks ago, 10 weeks ago. And so there's been a huge amount of coverage progress in Europe. Cities like Stockholm and London and Amsterdam, for example, are just exploding with Helium coverage, which is remarkable. We've got about 10,000, like I said, gateways and hotspots and miners sort of deployed across the world at this point. We've sold upwards of 20,000, and a lot of those have been just in the last 6 weeks with the introduction of the rack hotspot miner. And that's a huge sort of progression in the network, a much lower price point. And we partnered with Rack, which is a distributor out of China or manufacturer out of China, and a distributor called Calchip United States. And by our best estimations, we've produced about 1.2 million square miles worth of LoRaWAN coverage, which is, pretty remarkable. So, the reason why companies like NOWI are looking at the Helium network, so I think, maybe you guys can speak to this, but I think your situation might be a bit different because you were brought into LoRaWAN from sort of your Helium involvement with James. But I think a lot of companies are looking at LoRaWAN as a technology that's strategic, and they sort of go out there looking for networks to sort of satisfy their connectivity needs. So we see companies coming to us, both developers and enterprises, in droves for a variety of reasons. Primarily because, like I said, we are the largest LoRaWAN network in the United States. We're building something that's entirely optimized for long range and long battery life, and I'm hopeful that the discussion with you guys will sort of touch on that. The way that the Helium network works is that you're paying for data in something called a data credit, which is a little bit less traditional than something like just putting in a credit card and buying some number of packets or megabytes, for example, on a cellular network. That's entirely unique to how Helium does connectivity. The blockchain and the decentralized nature of the network affords for microtransactions and the ability to dial in exactly how much data you're sending. It's an entirely open source and decentralized network. There's upwards of 10,000 miners on the network at this point. And these are all full participants in providing coverage and creating and sort of maintaining the Helium blockchain, which is the sort of underpinning technology for the network. And then I'm not sure you guys are making use of this, but there's some interesting stuff happening with people actually using the blockchain to do things like audit trails for packets. We've got some cool use cases around monitoring of senior care facilities, for example, where they have to, for compliance reasons, know that the data left the facility to make sure that a message got through to provider. So these are a lot of the reasons why people are choosing the Helium network for their applications. And so, one thing to sort of focus in on before we jump into your use case, guys, is that people can, like I said before, dial in exactly how much they're going to spend on the network. So if you know exactly how much data you're going to send, maybe you guys can get into this in your presentation and talk about how much the sensor is sending, and you know how many sensors you're going to deploy, you can know down to the packet, right, how much it's going to cost you to send data on the network. And so the example that we use is illustrated here on the right. One device sending a packet every 5 minutes for an entire year is going to cost you $1.05 US, which is pretty remarkable. And so that's really the baseline we like to operate off. Okay, so enough about Helium for now. I'm going to kick it over to you, Charles, if you've got some slides ready. Yeah. I have to stop sharing. Let's do that. Sorry, this always makes my mouse disappear. All right, I think you should be able to take over. There we go. And once again, as we're working through these slides, feel free to drop questions in the chat here so that we can either pick them up in real time or we can get them at the Q&A. But yeah, go ahead and take over, guys.
Oh, you want to take this one? Oh, can you hear him?
If you're talking, Charles, we can't hear you.
Yep, I had on mute.
There you go.
So yeah, we've already kind of gone over this a bit. Again, I'm pretty much a software engineer in the project. Jim's, the mechanical engineer background, which has really been a pretty awesome combination of our talents. Because obviously, there's two sides of this. There's the mechanical side, where we have the water meter, and then the software side for the cloud and the firmware, all that. So we got really lucky. We had very compatible skill sets going into this. Should we go back over our story a bit, or feel pretty covered there?
Yeah, I mean, hit it real quick.
Yeah, so again, we had my brother, James, who's been the patron, brought us into the network. Tim was one of the first landlords we talked to, who were talking more about, just coverage using hotspots, and mentioned that he wanted to monitor water usage at his apartments. He said, he's had issues in the past where he gets surprise water bills that can be really expensive, and it's hard to figure out what's going on. And he doesn't realize there's a problem until he gets those expensive water bills. So once he told us about this issue, we kind of hopped on it, and that was back in January or so. And then over the next months since, we've been iterating on working on a water meter solution for him. And it's been a pretty awesome process. We've gone through a lot of iterations, working to get our meter more and more stable. And now I think we have, including Tim, about 20 properties out there. We've gotten to a solution where, we've had a really good reliability, and we've been able to add some good monitoring capabilities for the property owners who use it, and alerts. And, for every property that we pretty much put one of these water meters into, we've, the first one we put it into is awesome. We started seeing leaks and issues there. Which is really cool to see, and definitely some instant gratification. And ever since, we've just seen a pretty interesting array of, water leaks to abusive use to washing machines going crazy and using up a bunch of water and wasting it. So yeah, it's been a really cool process. Anything you want to add, Jim?
No, I just Knowledge's been cool, but it's been an incredible learning process, as I mentioned before, and the learning goes on. And we, Tim has provided us with a terrific platform to continue to do that.
Very cool. And to be clear, you guys were not water. You weren't thinking about water before this, right? This was like, I'm an engineer and we're self-starters. We're going to start a business. And what are the problems that people have that the Helium Network can solve? That's pretty much where this came from.
Yeah, I've always been eco-conscious, but water wasn't on the top of our mind.
Yeah. Okay. And then one thing that you covered in there that I want to sort of make sure people are sort of aware of. So we keep saying this thing, a Helium patron, right? The idea that there's this class of individual providing coverage. So a patron in the Helium world is actually somebody who's out there providing sort of a larger amount of coverage than sort of your standard network operator. So you can go to helium.com now and buy, one rack miner, for example, and deploy that and be a very, very important piece of the network. But there are a class of individuals who are out there building, very, very large amounts of coverage. Maybe it's an entire neighborhood or an entire city, or they're focusing on an entire region. So when we say patron, we mean someone who is providing an outsized amount of coverage. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, patrons are actually actively pairing with enterprise use cases to help expand their footprint much faster. I just want to make sure people understood that.
Cool. All right. So what is our solution? So here's our water meter. We have, we use this pretty much Dragino creates these nodes. And it hooks up to water meters that just have a pulse output. They're really easy to install. They just kind of install into your standard piping. We have a number of different size water meters for different housing and different sized plumbing. So it works with these Dragino meters. We spent a lot of time customize the firmware there. To read the data, work with the Helium network. They already worked with them, but to customize them for our own data, try to minimize the data, and try to make them as reliable as possible. We actually had a number of issues in the beginning working with for reliability, and part of it was just the firmware that we started with had to pretty much came from the manufacturer and kind of had some bugs in it. So it was an interesting process working through those and getting those cleaned up. But over time, we've come a pretty long way. So anyways, these nodes go up through the Helium network. We work with the AWS integration, which has just been awesome. I think that whole process of getting data from the node, getting up through AWS and getting into a database and onto a graph on a website, that was one of the quickest development process, parts of the development process. And one of the parts of it that, has honestly had the least amount of work in terms of that whole integration and going through AWS. For anybody who's worked with AWS's IoT core and that kind of stuff, and the way that it just integrates with Helium is really been pretty awesome. Almost too easy.
I can tell you that the work to get that done was much hairier than the work to spin it up on your side. Many long hours spent banging our heads against the wall looking at things like X509 certs to talk to their API. So before you move on, I want to actually dig into a few things. So talk to us about what exactly we're seeing here in this picture. So you've got the NOWI sensor in the top there, which is that Dragino piece that you guys sort of, you customize. And then the bottom, the pipe there, that exists in the facility, where you guys haven't added anything to that?
Yeah, Jake,
so,
Narla, let me jump in here for a minute. To answer your question, Mark, the bottom is a precision water meter that measures water flow down to 1/10 of a gallon a minute. And that's very important to our application because we want to be able to identify very small leaks. So, and precision, and these are very high quality water meters. The reason that Helium is such a terrific technology for this application is that property owners of these smaller multifamily units, 2 to 9 housing units within a building, is that they almost universally don't have access to Wi-Fi. There are Wi-Fi solutions out there that do precisely what we do. But again, property owners can't avail themselves of that because they don't have Wi-Fi, and nor do they want to put it in at $65 a month. So that is, that's a perfect application for Helium. And secondly, the Helium communication module doesn't require AC power. And to install anything in a commercial building that does require power would require a licensed electrician to come in and wire in
right.
unit. So those are two. That's why this is multifamily landlords are just a great target market for us.
Got it. Interesting. And so you said that meter is capable of monitoring down to 1/10 of a gallon, I think you said. Like what moves the needle for a landlord in terms of what you're monitoring? How an average, say, residential unit, what are they using for water per month, and how much do people actually care about? I mean, obviously you want to save every drop of water, but when you're monitoring things, what actually makes a difference?
A typical problem that we'll find maybe 5 gallons an hour or 10 gallons an hour. Mm-hmm. But when you multiply that over 24 hours and 30 days, it becomes to be thousands of gallons an hour. And we found situations where in one evening, one night, 2,500 gallons of water is being wasted through either an open valve in a toilet or through abusive use. So it would not be unusual at all for one unit within a multifamily property to, in one form or another, waste 10,000 gallons of water a year.
Wow. And then, so you're plugged into this. I mean, Charlie, walk us through the sort of the process for actually pulling the data off that meter. So it's like, what's the interface on the Dragino? How does the signal come out? How does that work?
Charlie, why don't you do that?
Yeah. So for us, we'll try to limit the data as much as possible to essentially what we need, because the smaller the data packet, the quicker we can get the data out, which means more power consumption savings. So really just sending out total gallons every time, which there's another piece there, for if you can't just send out, delta in gallons, how much it's changed, because with low raw, occasionally a packet might not get through. So you got to be able to, make up for missed packets. Played around with a few different data formats, but really just minimalized it down to a 4-byte packet. Just says total gallons and has plenty of room for however many gallons you ever use up in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And just send that up and go through AWS.
Man, 4 bytes, that's wild. And then how often are you guys sending back 4 bytes? You might have said it, I think I missed it.
Yeah, so usually when we install, we have kind of 2 different modes. We have a test mode, because you're kind of verifying where to put it in the basement, and all that kind of stuff. You obviously want to find a place where you have the best signal, which doesn't necessarily mean it's close to a window. Sometimes it's actually kind of more towards the center of the basement, where it's away from the stone walls and that kind of stuff. So that will send every 10 seconds. And then once we figure that out, we generally just once every 5 minutes we'll send up a data point. Interesting.
Okay, so let's talk about the signal a bit, because LoRaWAN and the Helium network is very, very good for getting small amounts of data through things like walls. But I mean, you guys amongst our user base are probably more demanding environments than most, right? Because you're in basements, you're below. I mean, what are we looking at here? Like definitely looks like a basement, right? I mean, can you walk us through the process of how you're verifying coverage? Because you've done a lot of work to, again, make sure that when you walk into a building and you deploy something, or one of your customers deploys it, that they're not going to have to go back and sort of service these things. So how does that process work, per site?
I'll take that one, Mark. We typically see anywhere from the street level to subgrade, where the basements are, anywhere from 20 to 30 dB of attenuation. So what we've done is um, both go in and measure the actual signal that we're getting in the basements. And we've also made comparative studies of how that relates to what we see on the street, so that we can drive by a building and say, okay, you know, we've got such and such a dB reception here, and it's likely that, you know, that we'll be able to get the reception in the basement. But at the end of the day, we have to go into the basement and measure the actual attenuation that we're getting, and the RSSI and the SNR that's actually present in the basement.
And so to do that, you're using like a specific coverage testing tool?
Well, we're using an Adunis meter,
Okay.
and to do that both on the street and in the basement as a first pass. The other thing that we've done, and I think we'll probably have to continue this, is that we'll hang a node without being hooked to a water meter in a basement for 24 hours and monitor it.
Nice. Okay.
And see which hotspots it's connecting up to, at you know, which particular signal strength. It's great to see some redundancy with several different hotspots registering a reasonable signal, you know, within the basement. As we get, we find that a hotspot has coverage for about 0.3 of a mile within most basements.
Right.
And ideally, I think to give some redundancy, we would set up networks that probably have, you know, a grid of maybe 1/4 of a mile between hotspots. So it needs to be quite a dense network of hotspots.
Interesting. Okay. Fascinating. All right. So Charles, I think you've got some UI screenshots here, right? Let's take a look at that, because let's tie that together with what we're seeing here in the basement.
Wait, sorry, what? You want?
Yeah, I'm asking a lot of questions. Just wanted you to move on.
Yeah. So yeah, once the data, you know, gets up into the cloud, we have a console for our property owners, which I can actually show separately. But here's just one example of, you know, we get real-time data on each of your sites, and you can go through historical data on your site. Here's just an example of, you know, one of the pretty classic leaks we see. We've heard statistics on this. About 20 to 30% of toilets have these what are called flapper valve leaks, and they actually waste a lot of water. And that's actually pretty consistent with what we've seen in the properties that we've gone with. But here's the kind of data you'll see. You know, every few minutes, you know, you just see another tick over the meter. And so you'll see this like throughout the day, and we've got, you know, alerts. So like a property owner doesn't just have to keep monitoring these graphs. We've got alerts that will automatically detect these and send the alert right to your phone or email. And yeah.
That's pretty wild.
The insidious thing about this kind of a leak is that it does go undetected for two reasons. One is that toilets can be so silent that when they do this, no one really knows they're doing it. And secondly, many tenants will simply not report because they don't pay for the water. So this kind of thing can literally go on for a year.
What is so in a market like Stonington, Connecticut, I mean, what's the price of a gallon of water? Like
it's actually by cubic foot. And it's 7 cents per cubic foot, but that's both going in and coming out. You get charged for.
They ding you both ways. Yeah, they always do. Right.
So a leak like this, I think I calculated it. A leak like this will cost, if it goes on, $100 a year.
Jeez. And that's just one toilet.
Yeah, this is just one toilet.
Yeah, wild.
You can see we have a whole case studies with a bunch of different kind of leaks we've seen, costs associated with them and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so a couple questions before we move on. Yeah, so Charles, can you pop back to the picture of the the sensor real quick. All right, so Keith is asking, the white wire in the picture can be of any length, meaning the transmitter could be placed outside the basement. So basically what he's saying is, if you want to run a wire all the way to the flow meter, could you do that?
Yeah, so that's actually something we're playing with now. There's actually 2 wires you can put in there. A lot of people are probably familiar with the dipole that usually comes in a wire. So yeah, this wire you can kind of move this node wherever you want in the basement. We usually put about 8 feet of wire there, and then we're playing around with the dipole, which allows to even bring that outside of a basement to allow for even more extended range.
Yeah.
We've seen that if you're able to bring the antenna outside, there's like about 10 dB that we get back by just getting it outside of the basement walls.
Which is like probably like 4x the range. It's crazy how that multiplies.
Yeah.
And do you lose any signal quality with a wire of, I don't know, 80 feet versus 2?
We're not reading like high precision signal by any means. It's just a pulse, and it's a slow pulse. So yeah, we don't really have any issues, or haven't seen any issues with 10 feet of wire there.
Got it.
Obviously, the antenna wire, if you make that too long, you'll start to hurt your.
Sure, yeah, that's a different story on the antenna. Okay, let's do one more question, and I'll have you move through the rest of the slides, and we can do more questions after that. So battery power on the sensor itself.
Yep. So these have 4 amp hour battery, and with the power consumption we have, it should last about 4 to 5 years.
Damn, that's awesome. Okay, carry on. And we got a couple more questions in the chat that we'll get to after this from, let's see, Tom, Matt, and Barack. Is there anything else you want to get to, Charles?
Oh, sorry, no.
Okay.
So, yeah, anything particular to move on, or just move on?
I think, yeah, okay. Then I guess we can just kick it into general Q&A if you guys don't have anything else on the slide. You sort of want to, I think we covered all this here, right?
So
on the WI helium stuff. Cool, okay. Yeah, this is fascinating. So, so you're mentioning that you've got, that one leak, could, the flapper leak might end up costing, somebody $100 a year per toilet. Talk to us a bit, and this question for Jim, talk to us a bit about the pricing model, how you guys sort of arrived at what you're charging, and share some data if you want to on what it actually costs. Curious to know how you go about actually selling it.
All right. The price we have on the node and the meter is $499.
Mm-hmm.
That does not include installation. The building owner needs to hire a licensed plumber to install it, but they typically can install the meter in about an hour, and the typical charge is $100 to do that. And then we get a dashboard fee of $8.50 a month. Typically that's per building because they only need to install one of these in a multifamily property that may have as many as they say, 9 units in it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where we're priced now, and it seems to be a fully acceptable pricing range for this particular market.
Okay, and then actually on the topic of installing, so a question from Matt Graver here. So in a high-rise building, how would you go about actually putting in sensors or meters, right? So let's say, for example, you've got a condo association that's 50 units inside of a high-rise. How granular can you get on the monitoring there?
Well, I don't actually think that we haven't done a 50-unit high-rise.
Sure.
And I wouldn't at this point consider that to be our target market.
Got it. Okay.
Because high-rise buildings typically have a very different plumbing infrastructure that we haven't risen to yet. It's
right.
Somewhat more sophisticated. So I really wouldn't want to speculate on. Obviously, it would have value.
Sure.
But the way we're set up now and the equipment that we have, it probably would be a very difficult task for us to put it into a 50-unit building.
Understood. So you're very focused on this specific sort of deployment.
If you look at the multifamily market of buildings that have 2 to 9 units, the U.S. Census has that at about 3 million units in the United
Okay.
States. Even that is a sizable market.
That's very large. You guys are going to have plenty of work to do before you crack out of that market. All right, so there's a few more questions, but I want to ask you, Charlie, and then Jim, each one more question before that. So, you're an engineer, Charlie, and so this was not too far outside of your comfort zone. I mean, what would you say was kind of the most challenging piece of building a connected product, right? I mean, writing some firmware that has to reliably send data to a web service and then figure out something from there. Like, what would you bang your head against the most, for example?
Yeah, so I mean, I came out of college as an electrical engineer, but my career has mostly been system level software engineering, back end like software engineering. So, the firmware has definitely been the toughest piece for me. Getting that to being fully reliable. I mean, Lewis has been incredible. Lewis, Travis, those guys have been an incredible help. To get over a bunch of obstacles there, but definitely, we were kind of joking around. We have these out in basements, and Tim's been an incredible property owner to work with in the beginning because we had a number of issues in the beginning where nodes would crash or it would lose connection or some other weird issue. So we've had to go around to a number of basements in New London and crawl around and upgrade these things. And we had one in a liquor store, and every time we'd go and upgrade it, we'd buy a case of beer. So for a while, we had a lot of beer in our house.
Yeah,
but
yeah, kind of like a memento from the field visit.
Yeah,
I've learned that Charlie really doesn't like spiders.
Yeah,
there's a lot there.
Okay, and then I guess on the flip side, Charlie, I mean, like any sort of in the development process, any moments where you were just like jumping around, high-fiving, super excited? I mean, I imagine when you put this thing in, let's say one of Tim's units, and he called you up, or you called him up and said, "Hey, you're losing X amount of dollars a month." That must have been pretty cool.
Yeah, I talked about earlier. Literally, the first site we went into, we started seeing a water leak. It's like hell yeah,
That's awesome.
We have a new landlord, and we've just finished installing the second water meter for them. And in both properties, as soon as we turned it on, they discovered a leak.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so one more question for you, and then we'll finish off the Q&A because we're running a little bit long here. So, Jim, you are a very sort of a strategic guy. So whenever you and I speak in terms of your BD plans, you're always looking many, many months and years into the future. What do you see as the sort of what do you worry about when you're looking at scalability? I mean, what do you see as the biggest issues that you guys are going to have to sort of cross if you're going to go from 50 customers to 500 to 5,000? I mean, what's on your mind there?
Well, what's on my mind every day is absolutely the scalability of this and building out the network in different cities to the density that we need it. And we're trying to come up with a business model that I believe is going to require local representation and local involvement. And obviously, we'd love to replicate the relationship that we've had with Tim in New London in other cities.
Sure.
The patron network within Helium would be an absolutely perfect avenue for that if there were patrons that are intent on building out their cities, that we would become involved with them. And I think this adds to what they have, because it adds data transfer to their build out of their existing hotspots.
Right.
And it also gives them a potential avenue for placement of different hotspots with landlords and
Sure.
buildings, and we are working on simplifying that process by building outdoor installations that have LTE backhaul in particular, and then you don't have to rely on Wi-Fi. And in that case, the only thing you need to do is run 110 power out to power the hotspot, and potentially, if you want great coverage, putting up an antenna on the roof and running a cable.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you guys have been pushing the envelope on the cellular backed stuff, and a lot of our customers are moving that direction too, which is great because, you know, that's the ultimate sort of standalone network that doesn't actually touch anything local, which is great. Okay, so I guess note to any patrons on the call, and just looking through the attendee list, I see at least 3, 4 of you out there. Jim and Charles have their emails here on the screen. You should be getting in touch with these guys because they're looking for patrons to help them sort of roll out. I'm also happy to make connections for anybody on the call that wants, but contact information is just right there. Okay, so a couple questions and we'll sort of wind this down. And I imagine you guys are totally fine to take emails from people who want to chat about this stuff afterwards. So let's see. So Barack is asking, are you considering offering this to utilities or to their customers? Meaning, like, do you foresee partnering with utilities to sort of push this into sort of homes, for example? Is that a channel you guys would consider in the future?
We've actually, we've talked with, in New London, the water commissioner, who is highly interested in this just for the purposes of water conservation and not having to build out their infrastructure anymore. And that's exactly what he has suggested, is that we talk to the, you know, the water companies. We haven't done that yet because we've had our hands full with what we've been doing. That will be an avenue that we will go down, yes.
Okay, good to know. And then I guess seems to be a lot of questions on sort of the level of granularity that you get from the data. So for example, let's say you're in that 3 million total addressable market, right? The 2 to 9 unit facilities. How granular? Like, can you pinpoint which toilet has a leak if you're up on you know, the inflow?
The answer is no.
Okay.
The landlord does have to go knocking on doors
I see.
to find out which particular. There are, you know, we've played with solutions that that would, for instance, hook to each toilet.
Sure.
And that's very possible. We have a prototype, and
Right.
that could be done as well. But no, it does require the landlord to suss out which particular toilet or whatever is done.
It certainly seems worth it on their behalf if they're going to be able to save all that money.
But I just want to say, for instance, Tim finds enough value in just having the 1 meter and knowing that there's a problem within the building to, you know, to be sufficient value.
Yeah. Okay. And so, I mean, is this the sort of thing where, like, if somebody owns an Airbnb, they should be calling you to take delivery on some hardware and set it up, or is it still going to require a professional installer? Maybe those things are not mutually exclusive.
Again, I think it depends on if an Airbnb has Wi-Fi available, which I think many of them do. We are in competition with Wi-Fi based systems.
Sure.
Although I keep getting reminded that you know, this NOWI system, a Helium system, doesn't have problems with changes of passwords. It doesn't have, you know, it has great reach throughout the house. So it's possible that this would be a solution for Airbnbs. It does get back to the issue of having sufficient coverage.
Sure. Okay. But there's a straightforward path of deployment there if you get sort of a friendly host, or, you know, if you happen to be in a city like where there's already coverage. So good. Okay. All right. I mean, do you guys have any questions? We're gonna wind it down. But do you guys have any questions for me for
Nope.
asking you?
We've asked a lot of questions over the months.
That's right. You have. All right. I'm looking through the questions here if there's anything I missed. Okay. All right. So let's see here. So yep. If anybody wants additional information on how these guys are building this application, you know, this is one of the coolest things that we have being built on the network now. It's like a fantastic sort of demonstration of what the Helium network is made for. You know, small data over long range from sensors that are living on batteries for 4 and 5 years. And again, the coolest thing is the value that it's bringing to landlords, right? So you know, they keep talking about this guy Tim on the call. I mean, Tim is looking, I imagine, Tim is reloading, you know, web pages daily, looking at this app and getting notifications and getting very excited, maybe depressed, I guess, about the data that he's seeing coming out of his buildings. So cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna let you guys go. I'll let you get back out there, close deals and keep building software. But again, my name is Mark. I'm the head of business development at Helium. My email is just mark@helium.com. And these guys here, Jim Fayal, Charles Fayal, Jim at NOWI Sensors, Charles at NOWISensors.com. Get in touch with them, ask some questions, use their product. And yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.